Hello everyone, I'm Alex Huff. I am the training manager here at ACES.
And I'm Dan Buckner. I am Fuels Origination Director and Strategic Development.
And we are part of the gas and electric team and would like to discuss on the video here today about the impacts of gas and electric and the changes that we're seeing there. So most people in the front office, Dan, are probably aware of the changes that we're seeing, but a lot of what we want to talk about was to expand this across ACES and make sure everyone was aware of what the changes are, because ultimately we can't think of every impact that the changes are going to have on all the groups here at ACES. So we want you guys to start thinking about, as we go through the video here, start thinking about what are the impacts to your groups and kind of what are some of the process, the changes you may have as a result.
As a little bit of a background, in March of 2014, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, issued a NOPR, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. And their goal was to better coordinate the scheduling of natural gas and electricity markets in light of increased reliance on natural gas for electric generation. And as a kind of a word picture, you can kind of imagine a coal plant with a big stack of coal in the front yard. That is their fuel. As we switch over to natural gas, you've got to coordinate that because you just can't have it sitting in the front yard. You have to coordinate with the pipelines. And so as that coordination has become more complex due to the number of plants running, the FERC saw a need to better coordinate these two industries. So they issued their NOPR. And then they handed it off to the industry to kind of debate, kind of work together to try to come up with some consensus on how to apply the NOPR. About a year later, after the FERC got the results back from the working groups and also hundreds of comments from individual parties, the FERC issued their final ruling on this. And there are four things we really want to point out from that final ruling. The first is that the timely nomination cycle for gas, they moved that back from 12:30 Eastern time to 2 o'clock. The idea there is that, and we'll see this as we get into each of the RTOs, but now the RTOs, as they move forward their day-ahead clearing, that can occur before the 2 p.m. nomination deadline. So that's the first change. Second change is we added a third intraday cycle. It'll occur later in the day to give you a chance to change your nomination as needed for unaccounted weather or things you just can't pick up on when you set up day ahead. Third thing we want to point out is that there's actually no change in the gas start day. That was part of the original NOPR, was to change this forward to account for the morning peak. The final ruling took that off, and so we stay with 10 a.m. Eastern time as the start of the gas day. And then lastly, when the final rule came out, it actually started a new clock. The ISOs and the RTOs now had to file within 90 days of the final ruling what they were then going to do as far as changing their schedules, their timelines, and they had to do so to make those schedules now work in conjunction or in harmony with the natural gas changes that the FERC put forth. So that started that clock. The RTOs could either change theirs or they could put forward a reason why they didn't think they needed to. But this chart, it highlights all of the changes for the gas nominations. There's really just two that I want to focus in on. The timely nomination cycle moves again from 12:30 to 2 p.m. That's the biggest change here. The second one is pretty important, is that the intraday 3 nomination cycle is going to be new. So at 8 p.m. Eastern time, you'll have one more chance to go out and change your nomination for that same day. So this chart has all of the changes on there. You can look at all the nuances and all the little pieces, but those are the two biggest ones that are going to impact how we do our business.
So now that Dan has discussed the changes on the gas side, I would like to spend some time talking about the changes on the electric side. So on the table here, you'll see that I have the effective dates laid out for the PJM, MISO, SPP, and the CalISO. So part of this is to realize that the PJM, the changes are right around the corner and at the end of March here as we go into April. Then from there, we see that MISO and SPP actually are going to have their changes in the fall. Now, the MISO effective date of November the 5th is still up in the air at FERC, and we'll have some type of firm ruling on that soon. But part of the other thing to realize here is that we're going to start to transition bids and offers earlier in the day as well as the awards. So you'll see here that PJM, MISO, SPP all are going to move their day-ahead bids and offers to be due by 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And so from there, the processing times are a little bit different, and that's why you see PJM and MISO, they're going live with their results at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then SPP won't be able to get their awards out until around 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Then the CalISO and ERCOT really weren't impacted by the gas and electric of the winter of 14 as much as the other ISOs. So we're actually not going to see any result of a change in those ISOs. So a lot of what we're going to focus on are PJM, MISO, and SPP. And now that we have laid out the changes that we're seeing with the deadlines themselves, let's talk about what the timing impacts might be. So one thing to kind of point out is that we may need to start to gather some data earlier on the front office and start to analyze that data and run the models to try to determine what might be clearing on the ISOs that next day. So part of that is in order to get those model results to our members ahead of morning calls that we might have with them. And so part of ensuring that we can meet the deadlines is to probably move up those calls a little bit earlier in the morning so that we have time to process the offers and get them into the market by that 10:30 a.m. time. So the other thing that we're kind of realizing is that IT may be impacted because they have certain scheduled jobs that they run to scrape the day, clearings, those types of things, that will now have to run earlier as a result of this. So Dan, are you able to talk about some other impacts that we have already seen and might see?
Yeah, one of the things we've done on the gas desk is in anticipation of this, is sort of expand our coverage. One of the things we may see is an earlier activity because of the earlier deadline for bids and offers. We also may see a little bit more of an activity that may occur during the lunch hour. And then we also may start to see some more activity in the evening. So as a result, we've added another staff member to the gas team so that we can kind of accommodate for some of that. Other groups may have something similar. We may start having the need for information that occur at times when traditionally maybe there's not anybody in the office. So as we go through these timing changes, just kind of think about that. Are you giving information to another group, or are you dependent upon information from another group by a certain time? And if so, start working with that group to try to work out the nuances to get that information to you when you need it. But there certainly could be some times where you have to shift either the number of people or even just when they cover their certain desk requirements. So as we go through the rest of this, Alex mentioned earlier, that's kind of one of your homework assignments. Start thinking about what are the changes and impacts to the processes that you work on now and who those impact, and then not only develop a list, but start working on the resolutions to those as well.
So now we would like to talk about the changes on the PJM, specifically in terms of how the gas and electric timelines have merged and how we are now effectively able to look at how the transition works on the gas and electric side and what the timelines look like here in the table. So as we've already mentioned, we are going live on the PJM side right around the corner in March here. But the gas trading window is usually around 8 to 10 a.m. Then that actually flows right into when bids and offers are due into the ISOs at 10:30 a.m. Then from there, the processing will occur and the PJM results or awards will come out at around 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. But one distinction on the PJM side is that for some gas resources, those quick start resources, that have a short lead time, those types of resources do not actually have a firm dispatch where a day-ahead award equals a certain real-time dispatch. Dan, are you able to talk more about what the impacts might be from a gas standpoint after realizing that the dispatches for quick start resources aren't a firm dispatch, but yet we are ahead of the timely cycle?
Yeah, that's the big challenge with PJM is you'll get a dispatch signal, and yet because you may not actually run the next day, you may actually not want to buy that gas during the timely cycle. Gas can be very expensive if you don't run. Trying to get rid of that gas the next day is complicated and costly. So that conflict, because of those peakers that may not be a firm dispatch, is that, yeah, we're before the timely cycle, but the risk of not running is too high. So it changes. Right now we have that happen later in the afternoon, and it sort of makes sense not to buy it. Now when we have this award before the timely cycle, there may be times that there's an advantage to getting the higher priority on the pipeline scheduling, which occurs during the timely cycle. So there's a bit of a strategy shift that we just have to work with and be coordinated with our members on that changes from how we do things now.
So now we're going to transition into more of the real-time timelines and the processes there. So you'll notice that we have the rebid period open from 1:30 to 2:15. Well, actually, in PJM, they're able to clear their awards as early as noon. So if you go back to the day-ahead awards and the timeline we had there, we had the fact that awards are out by 1:30, just ahead of the timely cycle. Well, really, PJM will have the ability to post a little bit earlier by noon if they have done the processing of their awards in time before 1:30. So then that will extend the rebid period. The rebid period gives resources that did not clear in the day ahead a chance to reoffer their units and change their offer prices if they deem that to be a need. Then they can make themselves more attractive for a rack. And what the rack is essentially where the ISO will have a chance to dispatch or to call on additional resources that are needed above what they may have cleared in the day ahead. So then from here, this is where we see that that PJM's doing something a little bit creative on the rack side, where they're actually going to try to have rack results out for those CTs that will be needed the next morning for the morning ramp period. They're going to try to have those out by 3 p.m. Now, one thing to distinguish here is that a dispatch in the real time from the rack is a firm dispatch where you know you're going to run. So that gives us a little bit more of an idea that we need to go ahead and get some gas in time for the run. Then from there, outside of resources that are going to be called on for the morning ramp by 3 p.m., then the PJM also has a deadline of 6:30 p.m. where they can effectively get any other resources that are needed. They can get those firm dispatches out by 6:30, just ahead of the evening cycle. So Dan will talk more about what the impacts might be as we start to see firm dispatches come out ahead of both the ID2 and the evening cycle.
All right, Alex, you touched on an important point here. The firm dispatch, that changes things from our day ahead strategy that we talked about. The firm dispatch now gives us some certainty that we're going to operate a plant, which means we're going to burn gas. Now at 3 o'clock, if we hear that we're going to run, we can go out and purchase that gas to match up with that dispatch. The thing that's important here is this also is going to be for the intraday 2 cycle, which again, if you think back to when I mentioned the gas day is going to go from 10 a.m. to 10 a.m., that gives you 10 hours where you actually have one gas day ending when the power day is starting. It's a little bit complicated, but during this cycle, we'll have a chance to go out and buy gas for that morning ramp. That's sort of the intent behind this. It's going to be about a 30-minute window. That's going to be pretty tight. The fact that it occurs during the normal business hours makes it a little bit easier to deal with. When we look at the 6:30, the evening rack clearing, then we have an issue there that's a little bit more challenging in that we have a 30-minute window, but this is going to occur largely when the industry, the gas side of the industry, has left the office. And I mentioned previously, we're probably going to be shifting in the gas side, and there may be somebody physically here to do that, but they still have to contact somebody in one of our counterparties' offices or one of their traders, and they're largely going to be out of the office. So for that person in our office to contact them and try to execute a deal in 30 minutes, that's going to be challenging. So the creativity that PJM is showing here with the 3 o'clock is great. Gives us some time to prepare and get things set up. The 6:30 is going to be a bit of a challenge just because of the liquidity in the market's going to be lower. Now, what we may see over time is that the market may start to develop. As you start to see people needing a service, then marketers are going to come in with some sort of a way to meet that demand and that need. It's just, we're talking March 31st, April 1st time frame. We're probably not going to see a lot of services out there on day one. As this market sort of matures, we may things pick up. But again, the biggest difference here is that now we'll have a firm dispatch and we'll have an opportunity to react and get gas scheduled prior to the day. So that should help out quite a bit.
So now we're going to transition into the MISO market. But first, let's talk a little bit about time zones. So Indiana historically was always on the same time year round. But in 2006, Indiana started to recognize daylight time. And we started to change twice a year of what time zone we were in to be more like the states around us. Illinois, Ohio, those types of states. So now we are seeing MISO did not follow suit with those changes. So when Indiana started recognizing daylight time back in 2006, MISO stayed on the same time zone year round and did not recognize the daylight time. Well, now MISO has reevaluated and they're going to start to recognize Eastern time and the daylight time as we change twice a year. So their market deadlines only, not their operating day, but their market deadlines are going to be 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, which is going to recognize the daylight time. Now, so as we look at the timeline, we see that the gas window, as it was on the PJM side, is open from 8 to 10 a.m. So part of that allows us to transition into bids and offers being due by 10:30 a.m. Then from there, MISO will have their awards out by 1:30 p.m. Eastern in the afternoon. Now the difference between MISO and PJM is that the awards we receive on the MISO side are more of a firm dispatch where we actually know our unit is going to be running in the real time. So that gives us a little bit more of the certainty from a gas standpoint. So Dan will talk more about the fact that we now have a firm dispatch ahead of the 2 p.m. timely cycle.
So Alex, again, the key thing there is that the day ahead award is going to be a firm award. That gives us some certainty that our unit's going to run tomorrow. Now let's look at a couple of things though on this timeline that are important. The gas trading window is it's approximately between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. every morning. Just by expanding the deadline or moving the deadline back for the timely cycle, back to 2 p.m., that is not automatically going to make that gas trading window get bigger. So that's important. So what's going to still happen is we are still going to see that by the time we get cleared at 1:30, we're really outside of the primary trading window. Okay, so what happens then at 1:30 is we get this dispatch, we try to react to it, and we have about a half an hour in order to do so. Also think a little bit about this now. This is in Eastern time. 1:30 Eastern time is going to be 12:30 Houston time, lunchtime. So we have a little bit of a challenge there. So again, we kind of have to plan ahead for how we do this. When you get that dispatch award at 1:30, you need to be able to have people that you can call and readily get things turned around quickly so you can get that nomination in for 2 o'clock. Those are going to be a few of the challenges we have with this. We may see over time that the gas trading window expands. It may go from 8 to 11 to whatever, it may expand. We also may see that some marketers come back and have services that they can sell to us that we can execute real quick. And that may be something that develops as well. Or maybe a pipeline may develop a service. We really don't know how this is going to develop, but at the outset, we don't anticipate seeing a lot of things out there ready to serve this market until the suppliers start to see this market really develop. So those are kind of the key pieces on this. When I mentioned gas trading window, let's go back to that real quick. Even though I say it's 8 to 10 a.m., again, it's an approximation. There's going to be some gas you could buy outside of that window, but then you start to pay a premium for that. So the gas can be there. It's a little harder to find, and when you do find it, it comes with a bit of a premium. So again, when we're looking at a 30-minute window here, those are the challenges that we're going to face right off the bat in trying to make sure we get our gas purchased for that timely cycle.
So now we're going to talk about the rebid window and the frac, as MISO calls it. So the rebid period is from 1:30 to 2:30 now in the MISO market. And that gives those units that didn't clear a chance to rebid their offers so that MISO can look at those units for a frac dispatch. So they're going to be looking at those units and they're going to be deciding if they need additional resources on top of what they cleared in the day ahead. Now, with a MISO frac result or a dispatch, we're actually going to have a start and stop. Now, there is going to be some flexibility with how those start and stops move, but for the most part, we have a better idea of what our dispatch is going to look at. So these results are going to be out by 6 p.m. in the evening, which is a lot better than what we have now, where sometimes they're out at 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. So with 6 o'clock, Dan, how about you talk to us a little bit more about what that will impact be on the gas side?
All right, so Alex, you touched on a couple of points there I want to look at. First, again, we have a firm dispatch. So that's a strategic advantage. We know how much gas to go and buy. But the other thing that changes here is that when we get to dispatch from the frac now, it often occurs well past the evening cycle. So we really can't do anything with it today. When MISO makes their changes, this dispatch from the frac will occur an hour before the evening cycle. So now we'll have an opportunity to go out, buy some gas, schedule the gas, and get that nominated prior to the evening cycle. I pointed out with PJM how we had a half an hour window and how that was challenging. With MISO, we're going to have an hour. Again, it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's better than a half an hour. As we mentioned with PJMs, there's going to be a little bit of a illiquidity in the market initially. We could see that develop as we buy more, as other power generators buy more in this period. But initially, we'll have an hour to go out and try to execute gas transactions in order to meet this dispatch from the frac.
So now let's look at SPP. But first, let's go back to the table we showed earlier with all of the timelines and deadlines. Those were in Eastern time. Now, on this slide specifically, we're looking at Central Time. SPP is in Central Time, so we've got all of our deadlines switched over to Central Time. So we see here that the gas window that was 8 to 10 a.m. is now sliding forward, and we will see that activity start to decrease on the gas side around 9 a.m., which transitions into a deadline for bids and offers by 9:30 a.m. Now, SPP takes a little bit longer to run their market, so their results will be out at 2 p.m. So that's actually going to be after the timely cycle. So Dan, what are some of the impacts that we're going to see as a result of the awards being after the timely cycle?
So, Alex, you're right. What we're going to see here is the day-ahead awards occurring after the timely cycle. What's going to probably happen, initially at least, is that the strategies we have today aren't going to change much under this new timeline for SPP. Right now, we get our day-ahead awards after the timely cycle. And oftentimes what we do is we rely more on our model runs. We rely more on what's happening with our units today. We rely more on what the weather looks like for tomorrow. And we'll make decisions during the timely cycle on what we think will happen. And then we'll go out oftentimes and buy that gas and put it in place. So the advantage here, though, is that now when we get an award 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, much later, it's hard to do anything about it until the next day. Getting an award at 2 o'clock, we'll still have a few hours left when the markets are slightly open. There will at least be people in their office in Houston that we can contact. So we'll have a bit of an opportunity to tweak, to adjust what we did during the timely cycle. So this is going to be, again, much the same with a bit of an advantage in that we get our information a little bit earlier than what we had before. Now, one thing we want to point out here, though, and this occurs really across every single one of the RTOs, but when we're in the timely cycle, the priority risk on the pipeline starts to increase after you get outside of the timely cycle. So if you don't nominate during the timely cycle, and you try to come in and nominate during one of the later cycles, if the pipeline capacity is full or tight, then you start to lose some of your priority, even if you're firm. So with SPP, one of the reasons why we go ahead and nominate a little bit ahead of time is we have some certainty from our models, but we want to also kind of keep that in mind. If we start to see the capacity pick up, and a case in point, Northern Natural Gas is one pipeline that is starting to have a lot more production into the pipe, and that capacity is getting tighter. If this continues to happen, we may need to be aware of that as you're making your purchase strategies to say, you know what, we need to make sure we are in the timely cycle so we can preserve that priority right. So those are the things that are going to change a little bit with SPP's times.
In SPP, we're looking at the open time period for offers in the real time have to be due by 2:45. So there's an open time period through the morning and the early afternoon, but by 2:45, all real-time offers need to be in for the consideration in the DRUC. So the DRUC for SPP is essentially the reason we saw SPP want to move their day-ahead timelines earlier. That way they could get in the DRUC results before the evening cycle. So Dan, what are some of the changes that we're going to see strategy-wise as a result of DRUC results being before the evening cycle?
All right, so again, when we're starting to look at, again, this is the DRUC here. So the DRUC results will be a firm result. And so that's an advantage that we have, like we saw in the other markets. In this one, we're going to have roughly 45 minutes. We should get those results by 5:15. The evening cycle deadline, 6 p.m. Central. So we should have about 45 minutes. We talked about the challenges of trying to get that done in a half an hour. We talked a little bit about trying to get it done in an hour. So 45 minutes is sort of a medium in between those two. We're still going to be chasing down people that are out of the office to get this done. Same situations are going to exist. Initially, the market for this is going to be a little bit illiquid. Perhaps this will develop over time, but it's one of those things that is an advantage to how we're doing things now because we get a RUC later in the day now, and we couldn't do anything until the following morning. Now, we could still take that same approach. We could still wait, but now we do have 45 minutes, and if we chose to, we could try to get a nomination in prior to that evening nomination cycle.
Now that we've talked about the timelines and the deadlines as a result of the gas and electric harmonization and the FERC, the final ruling, let's talk about kind of what happens next. So we've identified kind of three things that we kind of think should happen next to kind of make sure we're ready for the changes that we're going to see. So the first thing is that we, in this video, talked about some of the potential strategy changes and some of the process types of changes. But the one thing we really didn't do is think about everything. That's why your homework that we would like you to do is to think about your groups and what processes and what other types of changes may need to happen as a result of what we've laid out in all of the different ISOs. So Dan will talk about kind of a workshop that we're going to have, that we're going to want you to come forward with some of those ideas and thoughts as to what impacts you may see in your groups.
All right, so we're going to have 2 workshops. The first workshop is going to be focused internally, ACES staff. Hopefully at this workshop we will uncover everything that we need to know. We'll work through the timelines in each market, hopefully with every group in the ACES, and we'll look at how these things work and interact with each other. And you may think in your group you've identified everything, and all of a sudden you come to this meeting and you hear, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize that because trading needs this information earlier, well then IT needs this information earlier, and I support IT in this way, and all of a sudden I need to get something to them earlier. So please plan to come to the internal session, because it's going to be important that if these daisy chain of events happen and they impact you, we need to identify them at that point. Secondly, we want to have this sort of the same idea, the same workshop, but we want to then expand it to our members. So we've worked through a lot of the issues, the nuances internally. Now we're going to open this up and say, okay, listen, here are the changes, here's some of the things we're recommending, and get their impact. We may find from them that they can't have a morning meeting move forward because of something we're not aware of, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. So the meetings will be there to kind of be a catch-all to kind of help capture some of these things. As Alex mentioned, we really want you, though, before these workshops kick in, is to do some homework. And start off trying to identify what things are going to change in your processes. It's very important that you identify that ahead of time. But don't wait for these workshops to start working on these. It would be very helpful if you start contacting the people that are going to be impacted by your changes, so that they can start working on this and you can identify some problems with those changes. So start working on those fixes as well. And then third thing is identify who from your group is going to come to the workshop. It's very important that it's not sort of a random, oh, I didn't have time, I couldn't come. Identify who's going to come to this workshop and then try to allocate time. And if you're going to have nobody there, work with us so we can make sure the information is passed out. But it's really important that we can kind of have everybody there so we can kind of work through this together and identify any loopholes, problems, issues that we may not think of. Thanks.
Thanks for your time.